in development studies. So we're very excited to have both of them here today presenting on this wonderful topic. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Lily Chang.
Yes, good morning and good evening and midnight also. I want to first share with you that this is part of a China³ series. Now, China can mean the country of China or the land of China. China can also mean fine China, bone China, porcelain. China can also mean Changnan. So that is why we came up with China³ as an idea. Let me first begin with the first slide. So this presentation is on the Chinese Maritime Silk Road and the tremendous contributions that Admiral Zheng He provided for all of us. His 7 voyages all the way to the east coast of Africa resulted in today's Chinese diaspora, not only in Southeast Asia, but also in India, Arabia, Madagascar, and Africa, and of course, the Western world. So Peranakan culture, which is a direct result of Zheng He's voyages, will also be discussed today. If you look at the maps of what we call the ancient Silk Road, the land Silk Road, there were 3 routes, in particular, the north, the central, and the south. Tianshan Beilu, Tianshan Zhonglu, Tianshan Nanlu. Those roads were difficult, treacherous, mostly on camel's back. Next page. But the tremendous contribution of the Ocean Silk Road, the Maritime Silk Road, they were just so unbelievably magnificent, yet very few people talk about them. The main reason is because after Zheng He's last voyage, and he died on the 7th voyage, the Ming Dynasty actually closed up the Maritime Silk Road. So the Silk Roads, the Maritime Silk Road, went all the way to Africa, leaving behind heritages until today. Next page. So if you want to take a look at the 7 voyages, you can see the map on the right side. You can also see the chronology on top. This was before Christopher Columbus even started his journey. So it's very important to understand these voyages all the way through the South China Sea, through the Malacca Strait, through the Arabian Sea, and all the way through the Horn of Africa to Madagascar to Mombasa. Next page. So I don't know exactly what Zheng He really looked like, but this is a popular portrait of him, a very huge guy, very, very big guy. We call him Admiral. He was actually born in the province of Yunnan, and he practiced Islam. And he was a eunuch. He was also a diplomat. He was also a trade commissioner. Under his leadership, hundreds of ships carrying treasures such as porcelain, lacquer, silk, and other precious Chinese goods all the way to Africa. Next page. So if you ever have the opportunity to go to the Zheng He Museum in Malacca, Ma Liujia, you will see on the right a map. On the left, some type of a model of what we imagine Zheng He's fleet look like. In the center is what we call a Baochuan, the treasure ship. You can see how magnificent the fleet looks like, and also how huge the Baotuan looks like. Next page. In order to give you more of a sense of these ships, Zheng He was particularly capable of logistics. He was also capable of managing huge number of people. He would be considered a manager today, a great manager today. Now, the ships, they all have different functions. Some ships carry water, other ships carry animals, other ships carry grains, other ships carry different things. And they were able to use different types of communication system to figure out where they were going, what they were doing, how they were going to do it. So I have great admiration for Zheng He. Next page. If you look at the functions of these ships, you realize way back when logistics was already very powerful. Zheng He also hired many, many people from the south coast of China, Quanzhou, Guangzhou, and other places from majorly two provinces, Fujian and Guangdong, because they were seamen. They have always had the opportunity to enjoy the great ocean, the great sea. So Zheng He was smart. He was able to recruit a lot of people. Also, he was able to recruit people to build ships. In Nanjing, in Taichung, in Shanghai area, they were building ships. The Chinese already learned how to use 大漆, meaning the special paint, in order to preserve these ships. They would not rot away, because 大漆, qi qi, which is of course the basic elements for use to make lacquer. So these ships were tremendous. They also knew how to use the sails. They were different, they were collapsible, and they were able to withstand the wind and the storms of the ocean and the sea. Next page. As you can see, in the Malacca Museum of Zheng He, you will see maps. And my discussant, Melinda, will also talk a little bit more about the maps. But you can also see on the lower part of the left side, they use abacus, the national treasure of China, to do measurements. I found this very interesting. Next page. So you can see various maps in many museums showing the maritime Silk Road and the power of the maritime travels. Now, so Zheng He and his men, only men, so many of them, thousands of them, they travel. And Zheng He would leave behind many men in different parts of his journey, including Malacca, Penang, Singapore, and many other places, Indonesia, Java, so on and so forth. Next page. Now, Zheng He was in Nanjing, and this is a little map of Nanjing where he was, because he actually started his voyages out of Nanjing. Next page. You can see him with the beautiful backdrop. Next page. So I have to show you a little bit about the strategic position of Liujia, Malacca. Liujia, even until today, is the most dangerous area for the seamen, because they were pirates then, they are still pirates now. They lurk in the waters, and they would stop the voyages of Zheng He, and they would take the boat, and they would take the goods, they would take the men. So today, when we talk about the pirates, even way back when, the pirates were very active. Next page. So guess what? During these voyages, going all the way to the east coast of Africa, you can imagine also many voyages coming from that side all the way to the east. So back and forth through the centuries, there have been many sunken ships. These sunken ships would be, in my mind, the maritime museums. They would keep the time steady. They would keep the merchandise steady, although the men, some of them were saved, but many perished at sea. So you see the little blue bubble over there. That was the site of a sunken ship. Next one. So also, there is a museum called Maritime Silk Road Museum in Guangdong, because this is the site where they discovered a sunken ship. And this sunken ship is called Nanhai, a merchant ship in the southern Song dynasty. One stroke at a time, very carefully, these people are working on discovering the past, preserving the past, letting us have a glimpse of the bygone days. Also, being able to look at at this moment, over 180,000 pieces of cultural relics. Just imagine that. And can you imagine in the ocean today, how many sunken ships are there? How many histories can be discovered and how many treasures can be learned? Next page. So if you ever have a chance to visit the Guangdong Maritime Silk Road, you will find the actual ship looking like that. Next page. People work meticulously to find out and preserve a part of our human history. Next page. So you can imagine China porcelain came out of Jingdezhen in China. They are precious not only today, but they will be precious for eternity. You can find beautiful porcelain in every big museum in the world, including the museum in New York. The Metropolitan Museum of New York has precious china from Jingdezhen. The British Museum has a special room to showcase the porcelain. And of course, in Jiangxi, in Jingdezhen, and other parts of the major museums, you'll find these beautiful pieces. But also imagine loads of them were taken away from China to other parts of the world through Zheng He's diplomacy and goodwill. Next page. So, British researchers uncovered 12 shipwrecks in the Mediterranean. In the Mediterranean. Just imagine that. And you can find beautiful porcelain, Italian jugs, and Indian peppercorns. They were all there. So in the ocean, there are huge amounts of museums, the maritime museums. If you are a diver, I think you are in luck. Next page. So how do they do this? They go in, they try to find out. From uncovering the 12 ships in the Mediterranean, knowing many of them came from China, they found that silk was used to wrap some of the porcelain. They also found tea was used to cushion the silk. The tea is gone. The silk is gone. The china is still there. So the Maritime Silk Road should be actually called the Maritime China Porcelain Road. Next page. You can see these beautiful collections in the British Museum. And let me let you in on this most significant room, room 95. The picture was taken by me. Next one. Now, if you have time, I would hope you will get to know about the Peranakan people. The Peranakan people in many parts of Southeast Asia, will give you a sense of what they are. If you look at the right side, you will see Pierre Peng. I can't even say his name, but he showed up beautifully in a movie called Crazy Rich Asians. Let us just see a little bit of the Peranakan.
Hello. Oh, hello. Welcome to the Changs. My name is Dennis and this is my cousin June.
Welcome. Come in.
Okay, let's go to the next.
Special episode of Know My Home.
Excuse me, yeah, let's start, okay? Peranakan, you just saw a glimpse of it just now, but it has fascinated me for a very, very long time. When I stepped into a Peranakan home, I saw so many things that I grew up with. I saw porcelain, I saw silk slippers, I saw bowls, I saw teacups, I saw teapots, I saw lanterns, I saw Chinese characters, and on and on and on. I hope this will pique your interest in doing a deep dive into the culture of and Baba. In Mandarin, 娘惹 和 Baba. Now, the Peranakan Museum in Singapore is a prime example of what it looks like to be a Nyonya or to be a Baba. But what I want to say is Zheng He and his fleets had made a tremendous contribution in the actual Peranakan culture. So if you look at this little page here on the right side, you see walls filled with photos, and the photos tell you a long history. You will find Chinese characters indicating Chinese influence, in this case, in Singapore, and of course, in Malacca, in Penang, and other places of Southeast Asia. Some of these people speak Baba Malay, which is the Peranakan language. Baba Malay, Baba is the man of Peranakan culture. Next page. Now, there are many, many words that I would like to introduce you. Again, thanks to the Maritime Silk Road. The word anak means child. It is in the middle, embedded in the word Peranakan. So Malacca, Penang, or Bintan, or Penang, Singapore, Malaya. Malaya was formerly the former Malaysia. The word Nyonya, the word Baba, the word Peranakan, the word Baba Malay, the word Jakarta. All these words came from the interactions of people, and especially with a major impact from Zheng He and his voyages throughout the Maritime Silk Road. Next page, please. So if you ever travel to Southeast Asia, don't forget to travel through the Peranakan museums, the Peranakan house, and also many parts of these places. Next page. So what we see is a hybrid culture, or rather hybrid plus hybrid. I will show you an item called kanchang. It is a vessel. It is a coveted vessel in Penang and in Singapore. What is kanchang? This is the Chinese word 感情. It also means love. It also means union. It is something that any wedding in the past would have. And I will show it to you later. So the Hokkien language and the Malay language work together. And then there is a beautiful house in Singapore. And if you can make an appointment to go and see it, it would be wonderful. Katong Antique, Jiatong. So the hybrid culture was brought on by the Chinese sailors, by Zheng He, from the Hokkien, mostly the Hokkien sailors. So the languages that they presented is also called the Pidgin language. Pidgin is actually a Chinese word, a Cantonese word. The Cantonese people call business Pidgin, okay? And it's used in Hawaii as well. Next page. So take a look at this beautiful, unique piece of porcelain made mostly in Jingdezhen for Malaysia. Hanchang. You can take a look at such beautiful pieces in Singapore and in Malaysia. Next. You can see the beautiful Kamchang in the museums and in people's homes. Next page. Peranakan food, because when Zheng He and his sailors brought not only the Chinese language and culture, they also combined the local ingredients with the Chinese food and the local food. So they added a lot of spices, such as curry, such as pepper, local fruits, such as coconut, durian, breadfruit, mango, mangosteen. They used Chinese. They use tofu, they use soy sauce, they use Chinese rice, rice noodles, and bean sprouts, making it beautiful, delicious Peranakan food. Next page. Now in this house, this Katong house, I was so fascinated by it. I want to thank my friend Ken for making it possible for me to see it. As you can see, I was covered with a mask on the lower left side. Next page. Now, the food is absolutely delicious. I don't own any of the restaurants, but if you go, you gotta try the different kinds of food, including the black fruit, which was originally white. It had to be buried underground for 6 months. It will turn out to become black. You can use the food to cook these delicious dishes. You will also notice on the upper left corner, a pair of chopsticks and also the Chinese sauces as well. Next page. Now, if you look at Nyonya and Baba, you will see many, many things that will remind you of the Chinese porcelain. But you will also see many things that will remind you of the spices of Southeast Asia. Next page. So here I am, standing in front of Katong Antique House. I wish I could go back again very soon. I would like to take you there. Now, on the left side, you can see a combination of Chinese goodies and Malaysian goodies, Singaporean goodies, using the local ingredients. So when we talk about the Maritime Silk Road, we're talking about fusion. We're talking about transactions. We're talking about transcultural transformations, and it is absolutely beautiful. Next one. Again, don't you think you want to go for a treat? And if you look at the upper left corner, you will see what we call a 便当, meaning little different layers to contain food. One could be, the container could be soup, another could be meat, another could be rice, and all. But you will use a spoon, you will use a pair of chopsticks to eat most of the food, but sometimes you can also use your hand. Next one. Now, the Katong Antique House actually came from a long history. I have to pay tribute to the people who made it happen and who are sustaining it. Next page. You can see the interior of the house. They try to preserve everything and they collect many, many things. Next page. You can see beautiful beaded slippers. The beads are crystals in glass. They take hours and days and weeks to make, and they are part of the Peranakan culture. Behind the beaded slippers, you'll find on top of the lacquer box a beautiful Chinese porcelain teacup, and underneath, beautiful lacquer box with mother of pearl inlay. Next. So if you ever travel to Singapore, please visit the Peranakan Museum. Thanks Maritime Silk Road, we have a 土生文化馆. You see the third line is Malay. The fourth line is what? I would hope that you will figure it out yourself. Next. So you see the fusion of the East meets West. You can see the top of this door, a very Chinese design. You will see the bottom of this very Western design. So you can see how important it is that the Maritime Silk Road, the road, have connected the East and the West, resulting in such absolutely beautiful culture of fusion. I am just so excited to share with you. I know many of you know a lot about this, more than I do. But for me, as a student about Zhenghe, I just think this is so, so wonderful. A diplomat. He did not go to any place to colonize. He did not go to any place to take. He went there to give. He went there to learn as well. Next page. You can see the furniture. In fact, in our museum here, in the Chinese Culture Center, we have similar chairs. But guess what? This is in Singapore. This is Malaysia. And this can be in Indonesia as well. And Vietnam and Thailand. Next page. Now, here is part of the museum, remembering your ancestry. You can see a photo portrait in the back, but you can see also a fusion of crystal and Western design in the front. But the most important part of my discovery is on the upper right corner, and the two words, 追远, 慎终追远. The Chinese people always have to remember our ancestries. Now, by the way, 追远 was used also in the movie Rich Crazy Asians. Next page. East and West. You can enjoy it. You can spend a day, 2 days, a week at this Peranakan Museum. By the way, they haven't paid me to do this. I just think it's fascinating. Next page. Now you can see the beautiful Chinese characters showing friendship. 朋友的友. If you can read Chinese, you will see how important it is that we are friends and we have friendship. So Zhenghe's voyages was voyages of friendship. This is so important for people to understand. Next page. You can see also a beautiful fan with beautiful Chinese characters, Chinese painting, Chinese scenery. Now you've seen this, of course, at the Met, at the London Museum, at many museums, but also in Singapore and in Malaysia. Next page. Look at this. This furniture and silverware combined together into the melting of the East and the West. Next page. More beautiful designs of gold ornaments, taking the Chinese, the East, and the West together into the Peranakan culture. Next page. Again, we see something beautiful. It is in the idea of using porcelain with specific designs showing, again, the Peranakan culture. Porcelain from China. Next one. So I think by this time, you know why China is China. China means porcelain. This is the outside of the Peranakan Museum. Take a look at the design. It's a fusion. Next one. Now, I also want to tell you something that I discovered by going to Malacca, Maliojia. It's called the Wanggang. Now, for those of you who happen to be Chinese or with Chinese background, have you ever heard of Wanggang Boat Parade? You probably haven't. At least I have not. But it is true that the Chinese people in Malacca have preserved this particular Wangang boat culture. And they have an annual parade where they build this beautiful boat, and then eventually they parade it down the roads. And at the end of the day, they set the boat on fire to wish the boat the best of luck. Now, this is happening. The preservation of the Wangang boat culture is currently very much alive. In fact, there is a Wangang boat museum in Malacca. I hope you will visit it. I missed the opening date. It was actually last year. Next page. So let's look at what we call the One Belt, One Road. This is the current One Belt, One Road map. And if you look carefully, you can find many cities. You can find many ports. You'll find Calcutta, which is called Jaargada. You will find Colombo, which is in Sri Lanka, Colombo. You will find Haikou, which is Hainan Island. You will find also Yajada, which is Jakarta. You will also find Jilongpo, which is. You will also find Nairobi, which is in Kenya. You will also find Yadian, which is Athens, so on and so forth. Land and silk. I am very familiar with the Land Silk Road. I'm even more familiar with the Ocean Silk Road. So today you look at One Belt, One Road. What do you see? Next page. So let's turn our page to Kenya. Let's also turn our page to Africa. Our archaeological findings in Kenya. We found 600 years old Chinese coins. These excavations and discoveries clearly identify the Chinese presence in Kenya, not only in the Kenyan land proper, but also on the islands. And of course, I have to say Madagascar as well. Some of the ships sank and the people were saved, but others actually landed. Next page, please. So let's be more curious. Let's take a quick look at this Dongfei Zhu Mu. These are brave burial places in East Africa. And what you find today, of course, many of the pieces of china and porcelain were taken away, stolen, just like many people go to the pyramids to take away pieces of beautiful Egyptian artifacts. Also, people in China and other places would be the raiders of the tombs. But this is raiders of porcelain. You can see another page. Next one. Can you see? On these grave sites, they use china to decorate. They must love the porcelain from China. This is 600 years ago. Next page. You see more also on the Silk Road. Ocean Silk Road, Land Silk Road. Next page. So now, if you look at the intricate designs, these pieces not only are antiques, even though they were broken because of sunken ship and so on, they are considered such precious antiques. Next page. Now, the archaeological findings, they are continuing. So these are Chinese people in Kenya. Next page. What did they find? Let's take a look. Next page. Wow, they found ceramics. These ceramics came from China and from many hundreds of years ago. So if you go deep into the ocean or you go deep underground, you'll find many, many things. Next page, please. Look at this coin. This coin is called Ming Yongle Tongbao Qianbi. So it's from the Yongle era, and it's called Tongbao. As you can see, there's a hole in the middle. It's a typical Chinese Yongle Tongbao. This was found in Kenya. Next page. So there's also a Pate Island, and there were Chinese buried on the island. So I give you a map here so that if you ever have a chance to visit, you'll find some of the Chinese Africans in Pate Island. Next page. Okay, this is a map showing where the boat was, the ship sank, and many of the people were rescued, and they stayed there. Next page. And when people go to visit Pate Island, they saw not only people who look a bit Chinese, but also there's their gravesite and so on and so forth. So can we click onto the video for a few seconds to look?
Nearly 600 years ago, 20 Chinese sailors swam ashore to Lamu, having survived a shipwreck. And now, nearly 600 years later, as the Chinese New Year season is on, there is a scheduled meeting of the descendants. We drive into the island trailing the steps of the Chinese sailors who ended up living with the locals and now have descendants living in the village. We came across a marker bearing witness to the existence of Chinese influence and culture. There are loud indicators of the now faded footprints of the Chinese sailors. But of course, the last reminder lies in the bloodline of the Sharifa family.
First off, I am happy that even as I am Kenyan, I am also proud of the Chinese heritage I have in my bloodline. This comes from the Chinese sailor who swam ashore 600 years ago.
Several family heirlooms are displayed as remnants of the connection. The Chinese government has continued to support the Sharifa family, even sponsoring one of the descendants to study in China.
Okay.
We are
Okay.
with the Chinese and the Kenyan governments.
Okay, so if you're interested, you can find these beautiful videotapes. There are more people, Chinese, African descendants in Kenya, and I'm sure other parts of Africa. Next page. So if you look at the photos here, these people, all of them, say they came from the Chinese ancestry. Next page. So my discussion will talk about Qilin. Stay here. I want to say this because it's so interesting that the giraffe was taken to China and it was considered a qilin. Now, qilin in the Chinese culture is a very lucky animal. When you talk about qilin, you talk about qilin songzi. The qilin will bring you a beautiful son. But this painting showed that Zheng He's fleet brought back a gift to the emperor. And this qilin, this giraffe, actually landed in China as an immigrant. Okay, the story of qilin, I'm sure you will be interested in finding out. Let me just drop this question with you. Was a qilin very lonely? Was a qilin finding a home in China? What happened to the qilin? Next page. Now, this gentleman by the name of Sean Wang, he wanted to repeat the voyages of Zheng He, and he ended up going on the same route through Asia, India, Sri Lanka to Kenya. So let's see the next page. This was sponsored by the Fenghuang Dianshi, meaning the Phoenix television. Eventually, the ship was taken to Japan. This is a photo that he provided for us. Next page. Now, during the time of his voyage, he hit the 2004 tsunami. It forced him to stay on land, and also you can see what happened to the ship. Next page. He had a crew from Phoenix TV. They started out actually going from Hong Kong back into Nanjing and out. Next page. So what did he find on his voyage? He found in the Borneo River, there's a place called Borneo China River. In this river, in this cage, he found Chinese burial cage. Very important. So this is 2004, 600 years after Zheng He started his voyages. Next one. So he also found in Sri Lanka a Chinese tablet. This tablet was left behind by Zheng He. So here in Chinese, 翁以轩参访不失西兰山佛事碑. So this tablet is now being displayed in Sri Lanka, and it's shown in also Tamil, the language of Tamil, and also Persian. This is also such a precious piece of Chinese history and also multicultural history. Next page. So, what will happen 600 years from now? Zheng He to Ong Yixuan, Shan, and I raise the question for you. Next page. So I want to thank you for listening to this presentation, and I want to turn it over to Jacinda Wong.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lily Cheng, for that wonderful, wonderful discussion. I mean, the amazing photos makes me just want to get on a plane and travel, but unfortunately, I have a museum to run. So next time I have a chance, I definitely want to take a look at that. So now we're going to introduce our discussant, Melinda Tulla, who is going to give us some more perspective and to give us more information about this wonderful subject. Melinda?
Thank you very much. I'd also like to echo your sentiments, Dr. Lily. Thank you as always for enlightening us in your very soothing tones. I'd like to thank the San Diego State University Chinese Cultural Center and the San Diego Chinese Historical Museum, Jacinta, that you run, and welcoming me to discuss as a part of your San Diego American Experience and Beyond series. Fortunately, I have some background in that I live in China, and I'm currently in Shandong. I want to give a perspective as to how is it possible for someone like me who originally comes from Jamaica. And to Dr. Lily's point that Zheng He has influenced history, the Chinese diaspora, and other parts of the world. Is it possible that someone who voyaged the seas 700 years ago could still have an impact now? So I'd like to just read, if I may, I'd like to quote it. This is a quote. This is, if you could go back to the previous slide, thank you. Yes, just before we do that, thank you very much. I'd like to just quote the foreign minister who was in Jamaica earlier this year in January. He said, surprisingly, end quote, surprisingly, despite our countries, that's Jamaica and China, and the people's distinct national conditions, our peoples are tightly combined by the highly connected vision that we share. The concept of a shared future for mankind has similar implications to the national motto of Jamaica. Out of many, we are one people. So I want to just focus a little bit on why it may be surprising. So, and try to clear up for our listening audience why a country like Jamaica, which many of you may have heard of in the Caribbean Sea, only 3 million people, could have a vision similar to that of China. And so those two questions, that surprising connection in our vision, and also, is there any impact on that side of the world, at least in the little niche where I come from? Thank you. So next slide, please. Now, I'd also like to give you a little bit of a context from my professional background. I teach English as a foreign language, technically, but actually I also teach English as a lingua franca. So this concept of English as a means of communication, inter-community communication between peoples whose mother tongue is not English, actually is one of the defining features of our time. And as it was mentioned earlier, I have an interest, I'm striving towards postgrad studies in peace and development. So my focus is on the particular aspect of language and how language has pushed peace and development forward. And another focus is it possible that a universal language could also help to move humanity into a direction of interconnectedness? And as you may already know, our host, one of the mission statements is to help to contribute to the development of a more globally aware and interconnected society. So I feel very much at home in this space with you guys. Now, one of the contributions that language and the fact that humanity had developed language, one of our distinctive capacities above animals, is language can help us to communicate in abstract, right? So you don't need to have had the experience firsthand. You can understand with the use of your brain something that you have never experienced yourself. So you're understanding vicariously through someone else's experience. Now, this particular function of language was studied, and that's what you're looking at on the screen here. On the right side is one of the depictions from an experiment. Actually, this was conducted in the 1970s, not too far from where some of you are at the University of Carolina by Eleanor Roche. And what she found is that it's by the way, this is a psychological study. So it's not technically a linguistic study, but it is an interdisciplinary has interdisciplinary implications. So what we are looking at is this idea of what's called the prototype effect. So there are many aspects to language, but at the center of it is what you see there, the prototype effect. And when we think about a word that's spoken to us, actually our brain is imagining a concrete example of that word. So in this study, they found that when they asked bird, what is a bird? And they showed these different images. The participants were pretty much agreed that there are certain archetypes, right, of what the classic textbook example of a bird is. And in that culture, they chose robin, and as you can see, dove, sparrow. And so as the concentric circles move out, it seemed to the participants that these other creatures, for example, the penguin and the ostrich, were less suitable to the category bird. And so they weren't that concrete archetype, that prototype, as it was called from the study. And so what we have now found, neuroscience has confirmed this actually. You will notice in the orange concentric circle at the left under pragmatics, it says semantics. The brain actually semanticizes. It is going through the function of trying to collect as many experiences and understandings of meanings and put using time, also time is really important, to put all of the information in a category, categorize it, semanticize it, and store it into our long-term memory. So we have some interdisciplinary implications of this prototype effect with linguistics, psychology, and just the health of our brain and how it works. So could we just click on the slide twice, please? Thank you. All right. Now, regardless of the prototype, okay, the brain also needs context. So the wider circle, the yellow circle, meaning in context of discourse. So language is for communication, right? So when we speak to another person, interpersonal conversation, the other person is creating time and space between us, and that context will also affect meanings that we can derive from words. And I'm going into this in a little bit of detail. It will become clearer as we go along, so bear with me. And so, for example, a word like bitter, this is a word that can't be understood unless you have actually taken in something bitter through your sense of taste, or maybe even smell, but definitely taste. And so there are some words that we can take in through our senses and our nervous system, but there are other meanings that are abstract, excuse me, abstract. And so to try to put all of these concepts together in our mind, it is not always easy to get the gestalt, as it's called, the spirit of all of these things. But with time, it's possible to do it. And so context matters, your feeling matters, your culture matters. And so all of these associations help us to draw down meaning and understanding, especially between cultures. And so Dr. Lily mentioned Nanjing. I lived there for over 10 years. Quanzhou. I happened to visit Malacca in Malaysia in 2008. Indonesia. She mentioned the abacus. My children learned the abacus, and I visited the British Museum. So apart from just living in China, some of those other examples that Dr. Lily mentioned, I'm able to draw down more meaning and therefore, in my mind, imagine in a more vivid way. And usually the more that you can do that, the more unity you have between the interlocutors, the unity of vision, even though we are both not present in beautiful Singapore and so on. So thank you for bearing with me. Now we can get into the next slide. Thank you. All right, so the prototypes, for example, on the left, that's the crane, the red-crowned crane of China. And on the right, where I'm from, is the national doctor hummingbird. And so this is the thing. Most people tend to have different prototypes, especially when we're talking about intercultural communication. And so, what can we do when we're in this particular situation? Next slide, please. All right. So again, in the context of our conversation, we're trying to understand the significance of Admiral Deng He. And for those of us who are from the West, like me, if we are trying to put together the Gestalt and understand the spirit of this venerable admiral, what brain processes are we going through? So you're probably trying to compare him to another prototype, archetypical explorer, and who Dr. Lily also already mentioned. If you could just tap the slide, please. And twice, one more time, thank you. And so Christopher Columbus. And so Dr. Lily already mentioned that they're not contemporaries of each other. They lived at different times. So you wouldn't be, no one would hold it against you if you were thinking like this. If we could go to the next slide, please. And just tap a couple more times. Thank you. So we want to be able to make sure we're not conflating these two explorers. For those of you who know history, probably understand why. So we want to consider just in a general knowledge kind of way. And again, this is what cultures do. They use usually the adages, the sayings, and the wisdom that's passed down to try to make sense of how they're going to make a value judgment about something. So for those of us who are from the West, you may be familiar, every coin has two sides. I tell my students an inside and an outside. But anyway, and don't judge a book by its cover. So we want to keep that in mind as a common frame of reference. And so these common frames of reference now, if we have that, that's great for unity of vision. Thank you. Next slide. And what's more, to make this a more vivid and accurate process, we need to consider space-time. So we're going to apply the typical Cartesian grids here. So just tap the slide 2 more times, please. And we put these two figures in time and space. That's fine. Thank you. We can move on. Thank you. So what are some of the similarities? So that's what we want to look at. They both lived at a time post the flat Earth era. So they both agreed that the Earth and accepted it was round. And as you may know, Marco Polo, that's the picture that you see there. If you tap on the slide one more time, you'll see his name. Marco Polo traversed the land Silk Road that Dr. Lily mentioned. And he, coming from Rome, Venice, and this is the map perhaps that he used. This was done by another Venetian cartographer. And so the Europeans at that time, pretty much had an understanding that the world was round, but we know that there are some other things related to that. So I just want to move on to the next slide, please. So again, so we know that they both agreed the Earth was round. And one of the things that was influencing their time, and notice this is 1346, so this is way before both explorers were born, but this is the Middle Ages. This is the Dark Ages of European history. And even though trade was going on because of the land Silk Road, it's also the time when the bubonic plague, the Black Death, affected the continent and wiped out almost 50 million souls. And this is going to be significant as we move forward. Thank you. Next slide. And so you've seen the map on the left already. Dr. Lily shared that. I just want to point out why it's significant to what we're doing here. In the red circles on the left, the red on the right, the European map, another European map is on the right of the age. And that is, of course, a leaf from the map that Zheng He used. And that's Africa, Malindi, actually, in Kenya. And so this is all they knew. Even though they agreed they knew the world was round, this is the landmass that they thought was comprised of the world, right? So thank you. If we could continue, please. All right. And so that's maybe where the comparison, the similarities end. So if we could click on the graph here, it's just showing us that once we take all of that into account, the similarities, where do they start to diverge, these two explorers? Just click on the slide a couple of times. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So the next slide. Thank you. All right. So this is really where things are a little bit different. So this map says 1481, right? And in the green area, this is the territory that was controlled by the Ottoman Empire. They took over control of the territory. Now, 1481 is after Zheng He's voyages and before Christopher Columbus's voyages. But the reasons that they were traveling, that's where the differences come in. Yes, on the one hand, traveling by land was difficult for Zheng He, and it would be better to travel on the ocean because it was not as treacherous. But the goal and the purpose of those trips, and eventually what happened in the wake of trying to avoid passing through this western end of the Silk Road, is really something that makes a stark contrast, between these two voyagers. Thank you. Next slide. Okay, so far, and tap a couple of times, please. Thank you. And so far, we can see that difference. Now, another difference is the space, and Dr. Lily already spoke about this. And I just want to highlight in terms of the ships. So what you see here, 1403, when Zheng He's voyages began, and the red arrow, that is scale, and imagine scale his ship. Now, if you compare that to the green arrow moving to the left, his ships could be about 341 meters. The ships that Columbus was in 1,119 feet, so much smaller. And if you look up to the purple line there, you'll see the Titanic, which most of us would be familiar with, 509 years later. So this was a huge vessel, and of course, Dr. Lily told us what was in it. And if you could just tap one more time on the thank you. And we know that these were there were accidents, there were sinking, but it's important to understand that the reliability of his expertise as an admiral, and again, the cargo on the ships, very much different. It's the choices we make sometimes along our journey that ultimately may determine our legacy. Thank you. Next slide, please. So again, Admiral Zheng He, he had a giraffe, and I just want to touch a little bit more, just a little more context. Again, something very important to me. Dr. Lily showed the giraffe, and what I want to talk about is not just the fact that it could fit on the ship. That's impressive enough. But also, when this creature was sent as a gift to China, again, we have to understand the reciprocity that was moving along with all of his journey. So it's not just, oh, we want to sell our goods to you and we want to take in return, trade in return, whatever you have. There is also a sense on these voyages of goodwill. And so this gift, it's a Kenyan creature, but it gifted by the Bengali king at the time, this sense of goodwill. And so this gift, this exchange of gifts, and what it meant once the creature got to China, it sent shockwaves through the imperial court. The emperor, because of some domestic reasons, and the arrival of this creature, it reminded them of a mystical creature, and which had particular significance to that context, to that period of history, and to that culture. So the next slide, please. And so for those of you who are pop culture and Hollywood buffs, this is from the recent Shang-Chi movie with Canadian Chinese actress Simu Liu and others. And what you see is a mystical rendering of what the Jilin would have looked like compared to, as you see here, the giraffe. So they're not too far off, right? Thank you. Next, just tap on the slide, please, once more. Okay, and so this animal is said to appear when a benevolent leader is to be born or come into power, maybe even pass away. So the creature you see on the left, you may recognize it's from Harry Potter's universe, particularly Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, the third installment. And so this creature was to choose between the rightful rulers in that fantastical world. So this idea of benevolence was basically corroborated on the mainland in China. So it made this ruler, this emperor, it kind of legitimized his rule. So I just want to talk about, again, examples of things, how important it is to have a concrete example, to have something tangible, and to be able to understand how people draw down connotations, emotions, and so on. Thank you very much. Thank you. Next slide. Okay, and so again, we know that the giraffe, this very auspicious, caused a very auspicious and deep, impressive meaning for the people of that time. And we can just tap in. Thank you. So you can see this is not exactly the kind of feeling that was left in the minds of people in this side of the hemisphere. Well, your side of the world, right? The Western Hemisphere where you are. Once the Spaniards arrived. Thank you, please. The next slide. And so Zheng He, his concrete example, and I chose this statue. There's so many statues venerating him. This story, this legend, and his interactions with the region, again, it helped to leave a lasting impression in the long-term memory of the residents of this part of the world. And it's simple as that, right? Thank you. Next slide. And so you may be asking yourself, if you tap on the slide once more, why haven't we heard of him, for those of us in the West? And so this is the question that I want to try to answer. Just tap there, please. Well, again, he lived in 1405, voyaged in 1405, and the Spaniards, just tap one more time, please, 1492. And so there is this period of time in history where it's kind of before our time. Remember, Christopher Columbus discovered the New World. when he was trying to get to Asia, he bumped into the Bahamas. He bumped into Cuba. Interestingly, he thought Cuba was China. Imagine that. And so, unfortunately, even though he left such a lasting memory in his part of the world, really the record books, the history books, if you touch the slide one more time, please, thank you. The record books and history books over here, and once again, thank you. It's just almost lost, you know. And so if we move on to the next slide, please. So this is the world that was completed, right? This map was completed after 1492. And of course, it's constantly changing. So this prehistory, this old world, they call themselves that, by the way. I'm not being condescending. Press the slide one more time, please. Thank you. Is prehistoric. Another thing I just want to mention, you know, Zhenghe, there were no wars. There were no wars. There was no enslavement. Um, there was no bubonic plague. Um, his name is not on the map in the New World because he didn't put his name on the map of the Old World. We know that as the voyagers from Europe went around the world, mostly Europe went around the world, they named these places on our modern map after themselves. So in terms of English, it's or language itself, this nomenclature, whether it's Spanish, Portuguese, French, and so on, Dutch, there are all these new places named after the namesake country. But Zheng He didn't do that on behalf of the Chinese people. He didn't colonize any of these places either. Thank you. Next slide. And so the green circle is Jamaica, and the question is, how is it that there could be a connection between our little corner of the world, and it all started in 1838, and even though 1838 is the end of the slavery period, it is actually down to our independence, 1968, where we establish our identity. If you notice here, it says, out of many, we are one people. And the significance, for example, of the color black, it represents strength and creativity. And so as we move on, we'll see that we have blood, we have heritage, not only from the enslaved, mostly enslaved Africans who were forcibly brought to the colonies, but also from what's called indentured enslavement. They're voluntary. They had to work for a period of 3 to 5 years, but they couldn't return to their homeland. So whether it's the people from the subcontinent of India, the Middle East, and also Chinese. And so the next slide, please. This contingent, 800 Chinese, came over the period of 50 years. And during that time, in 1891, as you can see here, Qin Tongkao, he established the Chinese Benevolent Association. So I want to just point out the word benevolence again, that this spirit, if I may say so, this is my personal opinion, this spirit landed in the diaspora, it came with Chinese diaspora, and it started to impact the relationship with the people who were there. And so its aims of the Chinese Benevolent Association of Jamaica were to offer humanitarian and social aid, as well as preserve Chinese customs and ethnic identity. I myself have been there many times and participated in many activities there. Thank you. Next slide, please. And so it is between 1838, we could just tap on the slide a couple of times, these indentured slaves from China influenced our country to the extent that we have the motto, out of many, one people. And in 1972, we established formal relations with China. And it's been a relationship for about 52 years now. And since that time, again, as we know, China has grown from strength to strength. And in 2008, hosted the Beijing Olympic Games. And I just want to mention this for a Jamaican living here. The day after and the day before a certain event changed. I went from anonymous to Jamaican, identifiable as Jamaican in this country. So if we could tap on the slide a couple of times, please. Thank you. And so, of course, for those of you who may or may not know, Usain Bolt broke the world record for fastest man at that time. But he's not the most famous person in our eyes. He is an example. He's a prototype for many Chinese on the ground here. Next slide, please. But actually, there is another Jamaican between 1972 and 2008, and particularly 1978. His name is Bob Marley. Some of you may know there was a movie released in January of this year, and he was a singer, and he made popular some of our interpretations of our motto, out of many, one people, particularly one love, one heart, one destiny. And so, of course, in 2009, we have one belt, one road. So this idea of benevolence, I think, one of the legacies of the spirit, one of the virtues of the Chinese spirit and characteristics. And so I do believe that because of his efforts and his concrete example for the people of China, they were able to actually take that into their hearts and take it with them wherever they went into the diaspora, along with many virtues. I'm just mentioning this one. We can move on to the next slide. Thank you. And so I do believe you see here another pop culture reference. I do believe that his story inspires, and I think this is also a part of the goodwill. It inspires people. And so this is from Star Trek, for those of you who are trekkers, and these ships in the future are named after Zheng He. So we can tap once again. So I think his legacy will be, he'll continue. You can tap twice. People can see how his enduring, inspirational approach to diplomacy worked. Okay, it worked. And it was peaceful. And so when it comes to people exchanges and interpersonal relationships, when we have the same understanding and the same vision, we can come to a better simpatico. And that is essentially, I think, one of the enduring legacies and contributions of Zheng He. And so here I just, for very, very quickly, want to talk about a fable from the Indian subcontinent. You see there the Taj Mahal, the blind man and the elephant. And it's this idea that 6 blind men, they don't know what an elephant looks like. They go to the king, yes, and the king says, this is an elephant. So they touch it, touch different parts. Oh, it's not. This is a spear, the tusk, and so on. This is the tail. This is rope. But he insisted, this is an elephant. If you share your information, if you share your ideas, you'll come to a united vision in the end. And so thank you. We can touch the slide again. This oneness, this shared vision, this sharing of know-how, this sharing of understanding, and of course, trying to understand the world from the other's perspective, I believe will eventually lead us into the future. And that is why Zhenghe has implications for Jamaica and the rest of the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Melinda. That was wonderful, wonderful. And I really appreciate you staying up so late to join us for this discussion. I mean, what a wonderful way to start our day with talks of goodwill and benevolence, of these journeys to start our day. The fact that, subjugation was unheard of, right? And, just to add in another element of another country, right? I know Dr. Bob was bringing up the kind of the idea of the Silk Road, the fact that it was first coined by Baron Ferdinand von Richthofen, I believe is the name, from Germany, who termed the who coined the term, and he was it's interesting because it always brings to mind a common misconception about the Silk Road, with it being primarily a road, right, first and foremost, and that silk was the primary trade on it. But this lecture was wonderful, talking about the legacy of the Maritime Silk Road, and how it endures, right, is a testament to Zhonghe and the spirit of human exploration, connectivity that for our globalized world. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We're going to remind all the principals to stay on after we finish our questions and answers. At this point, I'm going to invite Elizabeth to see if she can, manage the chat and see if we have any questions for our panelists.
Okay, well, we have some questions from earlier. I could see that Jia Wei has a question about, she's interested to know the Chinese word for Peranakan.
Dr. Lillian?
Yeah, 土生. And then the most important Peranakan men is Baba, Peranakan women, 娘惹, nyonya.
Yes, I figured it out afterwards. It showed up, not right away.
Right. Okay.
Right. We also had a question from Andrew Lo. He was interested to know if Zhenghe crossed the Atlantic Ocean, and mentions that he understood that there were Chinese artifacts in the Caribbean, or were there artifacts in the Caribbean?
I think this is up to debate. I'm actually studying this part, and maybe on a later lecture, I'll share my findings. But at this time, from the record that I could find, by the way, after Zhenghe died on his last voyage, the Ming Dynasty pretty much closed the ocean roads. So it's called a Haijing, so they kind of stop it. They even destroy most of the documents. So it is up to our imagination sometimes to figure this out. Sure, he was definitely, and his men, they were definitely in the east coast of Africa. So let's put this question to our question box, and we can find out more later on.
Sounds good. I see that there's a hand raised. Jason Xu, would you like to turn on your camera and your microphone and speak?
Yes. Hi. I'm fascinated by the Maritime Silk Road. Just wondering, in your research, that's a question for all of you. When you travel along the Maritime Silk Road, when you visit all these museums, these places, have you seen much of Roman artifacts or Roman coins or anything of Roman nature? The reason I ask that is about 1,200 years before Zhenghe's voyage, according to the Chinese records, the Roman Emperor Aurelius sent his emissaries to China, arrived in the Chinese capital, Luoyang, back then was the Han Dynasty. But the puzzle really is the gifts that these Roman emissaries presented were not really Roman in nature. They were more like things that they acquired in Southeast Asia. So my question, my puzzle has always been, did they leave Rome with actually some Roman gifts? Or what happened to those Roman gifts? Did they actually end up doing some money exchange somewhere along the road? So that's been my big puzzle all along is what happened if you guys know anything about that exchange. That's historically supposed to be the first government-to-government exchange between Europe and China. That is about the year 166, 168, somewhere around there.
Well, also, I am so thankful for your question. This will give me time to do more research. But let me tell you, my interest actually began when I figured out that people travel by land and people travel by sea. So if the Romans actually came over across the Mediterranean, somehow, either going down or going through the channel in Egypt and so on, they might be able to take the ship all the way through the Maritime Silk Road. But you're talking about 100 years before Zheng He actually took his ships to Africa. We would have to prove that these Romans actually were not on horsebacks or were not on camel's back, but actually on ships. That would take a lot of work. And also one more thing, through my research, I found out the Chinese, not only because they use lacquer to be able to paint the bottom of the ship. They also had designs to close the chambers so that they would not sink in certain ways, but also the collapsible sailboats that would be more steady to travel. Did the Romans have vessels like that? So these would be wonderful questions, but today we will leave those questions to us, and hopefully next time we can share more. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you. Because they had to take the maritime road because they were in war with Persia. So they couldn't really travel by land back then. So that's, I think one day I will join you guys on a tour. And I really like to see all these museums along the way to see what's going on there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Xu, for your question.
We also have a question from Lily Birmingham. Lily, would you like to turn your microphone on?
Okay, I have a comment about this Roman coins. See, maritime Silk Road was later getting popular, but the early roads were the land road. I think we all know, familiar with the land road Lily C showed. And so during the early years, Central Asia people were the middlemen. So they actually, I know there were coins, Roman coins discovered in Central Asia. They probably came all the way to China. And as I think prior presentation talk about, many people on the land route didn't go all the way from Rome to China or vice versa. They were taking segments. So the things were keep getting exchanged and all the way. The silk went to Rome because they wanted silk. And during that time, silk was also a currency. So I don't know how the coins would be used because people probably didn't trust other people's coins, but they may be more of a souvenir or collection for people to keep. And that's why they were Roman coins stayed in Central Asia. So, but maybe later we'll figure out more. So the land route Silk Road had its heydays during the Tang Dynasty, about 7th to the 10th century. And after that, it declined, and probably due to various reasons, the wars, or also when you're shipping things on the ship, you can carry a lot more items. And that's why the Silk Road really turned into Maritime Silk Road. And as Lily C talked about, there's so much more going on for the Maritime Silk Road. And I really appreciate her presentation about the culture, the language that stayed in South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Africa. So they're all very, very, very interesting. Actually, I have a question. I think you guys talk about the tour. Are there actual tour for Maritime Silk Road offered somewhere? Does anybody know?
Well, in my mind, I think it would be a wonderful tour, but it is very arduous. So to take a tour like that would require a lot of planning. So I think sections of the tour could be done. I think most impressive, as far as I'm concerned, trying to understand the Maritime Silk Road was actually really through South. I mean, there is so much in the language, the culture, the way of life, all of it. You can see the infusion of trans-cultural transformation. So maybe we can work together and get a tour ready, and many of you can join us on Silk Road.
Thank you.
Okay. I see that Jia Wei has her hand raised. I know that we're getting a little bit late on time, but Jia Wei, would you like to open your microphone and turn on your camera?
Yes. Thank you very much, Lily and Melinda. I have a few questions, but you can choose one to answer if you can answer all. I'm more interested in the historical aspect of this Zheng He's voyage to the west, Maritime Silk Road. Obviously, it took a lot of time to prepare for all these ships to start this, and it started in the Yongle time, which was the height of the Ming Dynasty. But I believe it has to start, this aspiration of going west had to start before Yongle, because it took a lot of preparation for such a huge journey to the unknown. So I just wonder, what is the aspiration? Who initiated this whole project? And why? How come Zheng He, who was born in Yunnan, which is inland China, had not a sea person and got appointed as the leader? I would rather say leader than the manager of the whole fleet, and get the trust. That's one thing. And also, you mentioned about they tend the goal of this voyage is for friendship and goodwill. I believe that is true, the goodwill, because that's always the Chinese way. And somehow I believe the main purpose is for trade. And just like the Silk Road, the trade is a very fair thing. It means you give something, you take something back. You also mentioned that they actually, through the journal, there are people who left alone on the land, and that's how they stayed in all these places, right? And they got descendants and so on. Did they take any foreigners back to China? I didn't see any mentioning of that. They did take a lot of stuff, objects, artifacts back to China, even including a giraffe, which is an animal. But any foreigners came back with the ship and settled down in China? Do you know of it?
Okay, you have many questions, and maybe Melinda can chime in later. Yeah, he was a manager. He was a leader. He was a visionary once he started. But before he started, he was a eunuch, a Muslim. He was taken into the court, but he won the respect and the trust of the emperor. So the emperor was the one that wanted to spread Chineseness or the greatness of China to other parts of the world. So yes, goodwill, yes, benevolence, and underneath of it all, certainly commerce. No doubt about it. That's why I think he was a good manager, meaning in the sense of business. Zheng He had very little knowledge about the seafaring affairs. So he had to rely on the seamen, only men, along the coast of China. So again, these people had long history of sea journeys. He employed and hired these people to go on the journeys with him. Definitely, he depended on the expertise of the people who had a long history of through China, the Philippines, to Indonesia, to Malaysia, to Southeast Asia, to Vietnam, and even to India. So yes, his seamen, they were very, very capable. Number two, he left many men behind for a number of reasons from what I can gather and from some of the researchers. Number one, he would have to return to China. So on the way back to China, he would like to go to some of the ports. He would like to gather more water, more coconuts, more different things and so on. And also the goodwill also means these men would be planting vegetables, rice, and other things, and they would get married with the local women. So the Peranakan culture is a very strong one in Southeast Asia, especially Malaysia, Indonesia, and Singapore. So that's why I think a large gift of Zheng He to all these places is the gift of transformation, the gift of transcultural interpretation, transcultural communication. So I would say, so did he bring people from his journeys back to China? He could bring a giraffe. I am very confident he could have brought other people and items to China. It's just that the records were destroyed, unfortunately.
Thank you very much.
So, Jacinda. Yeah.
Thank you, Lily, so much. Thank you, everyone.